Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see, we've got a decent amount of attendees. Let's give people a couple minutes to join. But again, I appreciate you taking the time to join us for this webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on the short-term rental market. What I want to do is I want to introduce our CEO and President, Joseph DiTomaso. He'd like to say a quick intro before we jump into it. Without further ado, Joe, if you don't mind, if you just jump into it, give us a quick intro, and then we can get into the webinar, if that's all right.
Sure, Victor. Thank you, and thank you for arranging this, you and Talia. And folks, thank you for taking the time to be on this call. As Victor mentioned, we've put together a pretty powerful deck that goes through the impact that we're seeing in the travel segment, particularly in the short-term rental market, as well as some of the new products that we've rolled out. A few of them include our data dashboard, which everyone on this phone could go to our website and subscribe for, a pretty powerful product that shows you all sorts of powerful trends taking place for any geographic location. Victor's also going to spend some time going through a new product which we've rolled out, the Forward Booking Index, which has similar features to ATR's occupancy rates and utilization rates that we've seen over the past few years, but using using the calendars and data that we have to be able to look out. And the power behind that essentially is the ability to see and discern where, when, how far out, and what type of bookings are taking place at any given moment in time. You have alert features and some pretty powerful tools and systems. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Victor. He'll walk through the presentation. We're anxious to hear back from you. This product was really developed out of a listening for what was missing with our clients. So hopefully we'll get some great feedback from you. Victor, thank you. I'll hand it back to you.
All right, I appreciate it, Joe. So what we're going to go through, essentially this webinar, we're going to break it up into two main bits. We're going to look at what's kind of already taken place. We're going to look at some key markets. We're going to split out, we're going to group vacation destination areas versus metro regions. And then we're going to go into our forward booking index. Really, I'll try to spend more time on that. And again, what we're doing there is we're looking at what we're seeing in the future in hopes of providing an indication or trying to gauge a traveler sentiment, or rather a shift in traveler sentiment. So for us, that we're able to identify when we can expect a recovery in the travel industry, but also using the short-term rental industry as or short-term rental market as a proxy. Okay. But before I get into the numbers, into the data, I think it's important to note some key dates that will lend some context to when we're looking at the time series, and really March is kind of will be our focus. Although the first reported case was late January, the first death was recorded in late February. It's really March is when things start kicking off, so to speak, not only with the coronavirus in the US, but you'll see that also in the data in these markets that we're going to view. So really March 13, US declares a national emergency. March 19, California becomes the first state to employ stay-at-home measures. And then quickly after that, most or a substantial amount of states follow suit in enacting some form or similar version of those lockdown measures. Again, March is going to be kind of a theme as we go through here. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at kind of the differences between, we're going to group vacation destination areas or markets versus metropolitan regions, because they do differ in certain respects, and you'll see that come through the numbers. Okay, and so for the vacation rental destinations, what we're going to do, we're going to feature Panama City Beach, Galveston, Texas, and Hilton Head, South Carolina. Each of these have enacted some form of a short-term rental ban, a temporary ban, in March and going into April. So that's going to be an important factor when we're comparing the vacation destinations to metropolitan regions. But let's look at, again, the vacation rental areas first, okay? So, the first 3 months of, say, 2020, that's what we're looking here, purely at 2020 now, are quite normal. They kind of follow the very similar trend lines. Galveston outperforming the other two markets a bit. But what we have here are your normal weekday, weekend peaks and troughs progression, okay? Again, a little bit of spike here in Galveston, but again, everything quite normal, even though, again, the virus is, it's in China. We're all kind of tracking what's happening in China and in Europe, but it still hasn't really taken hold in the US yet, okay? And then here, look, early March, we see a pretty sizable uptick for all three markets, certainly for Galveston here, right? We're getting into the spring break region, okay, here. And then, excuse me, apologize. Okay, and so what we're seeing here, and then what we should be looking at then is at what time are they dropping off, okay? We're looking at Galveston and Hilton Head around the same time. Let's call that March 15th is fair, maybe Galveston the day before, and that's really when we start seeing this drop, okay? When we're seeing Galveston at a 60% occupancy rate, and then drop down to about a 10% occupancy rate here, right? And all three kind of fall at that same bottom line, that same 10% occupancy rate. You'll see Galveston kind of sputter a bit and then come back down. Funny enough, so both Galveston and Hilton Head around the same time, mid-March, is when they see that drop in demand. Panama City Beach goes for another couple days, half a week or so, and then meets both of those other markets, again, at that 10% plateau. You might be asking why these areas are not at, say, a 0% occupancy rate, as they have enacted a temporary short-term rental ban, and that's due mainly because the ban was not enacted against, say, an Airbnb, where Airbnb had to shut down bookings to those regions. The onus was on the host to no longer take future bookings. And so we suspect there's going to be some opportunists out there that either they're looking to salvage some revenues that they otherwise were going to lose, or again, there's in other outside metro areas, like outside New York is something what we've seen. People are trying to leave the city, trying to leave those the virus hotspots into more rural areas. And so you're going to have some hosts that will take, opportunists out there, right? So that's why we're seeing, and then also the kind of the cancellation debacle, for lack of a better term, that Airbnb was dealing with. So what you have are, there are going to be reservations still on the books, but the guests aren't staying there, right? So that will still read in our numbers as a booking. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. Okay, if you then now compare that to the metropolitan regions, we focused here on Seattle and Austin. You'll notice a pretty consistent trend line between both of them up until kind of the point in March, right? So, but they really do follow each other quite closely. There's not much daylight in between them, okay? But where they're seeing a drop in demand is about, say, March 6th, March 7th. So I'd say about a week to 2 weeks prior to that of the vacation rental destinations or vacation destination. So there's a stark difference there between the two. And then again, both of them about the same time, then they bottom out. Now they bottom out at a different level. They're bottoming out at about a 20% to 18% occupancy rate. When you compare that to the vacation destinations that are sitting at about a 10, 12%. Again, part of that has to deal with the metropolitan regions deciding not to enact a ban to the level that the vacation rental markets have done, or vacation destinations have done. So that's certainly part of it as well. Okay, and then let's quickly take a look at, let's focus on Austin here, and just a year over year. I want to show you what, for occupancy rate, what a quote unquote normal year should look like. Okay, we're going to be using 2019 as our baseline. We're always going to be comparing what we've done, what we're currently doing, and versus what happened last year, and look to 2019 as what we want to get back to. Okay, and so you see here again your normal weekday, weekend troughs. Okay, here's you get a spike in Austin for South by Southwest. right before 2020 South by Southwest was supposed to take place is when you get the drop in demand, okay? So I just wanted to show you guys visually of the difference of what we're seeing in an occupancy rate. Again, this is data that has already happened. This is what we have in our normal vacation rental market intelligence reports. The subscribers on this call will recognize kind of what we're presenting here. Okay, just key takeaways that I want to mention. So just reiterating what I just mentioned. Again, metropolitan areas were the first to notice that drop in occupancy rates, whereas in the vacation destinations saw their dip about a week or two later. Metro areas maintaining a slight higher occupancy rate due partly to declining to impose those same short-term rental bans as the destinations have. And regardless of those STR or short-term rental bans, the host in, or rather the vacation destination, still saw occupancy rates over the 0%, as some of you may have thought that would be, due to opportunistic hosts still taking bookings, and kind of due to the disorder in terms of a cancellation policy of an Airbnb. All right, now I want to get into the forward booking index, okay? And I just want to mention also a couple quick notes with respects to the forward booking index that are key to know. Well, one, we're going to be focusing mainly on Austin, Texas, kind of as a proxy here. A main differentiator is, or that needs to be said, is there are clear methodology and model differences between our forward booking index and our typical reporting. That's mainly because our typical reporting, we're looking back, things that have already happened and stays that have already happened. That allows us to be more accurate. When we're looking forward, we don't have the luxury of reviews, which is a key component in our occupancy rates, okay? So they're not exactly apples to apples comparison, so that for any current subscriber that does get into our forward booking index, that if you put them next, you shouldn't put them next to each other, right? What we're looking here with the forward booking index as it's an indicator. That's what we're trying to do here. Look at what, try to find an indication of recovery, okay? And then we're gonna be looking more at absolute data points, so like nights booked rather than an occupancy rate. Because with an occupancy rate, we're also relying on supply, and there's a lot of unknown factors that are currently affecting supply in these particular areas. So really, we're looking at nights booked is our key indicator. We're gonna look at occupancy rate as well, but we like nights booked for this. And nights booked in this context, the methodology here are guest nights booked. So you might have, say on June 1, you'll have 500 nights booked. That's 500 guest nights booked. So that means like 500 listings were booked for that day. Just so you know, I'm gonna be mentioning snapshot date and calendar date. I give a very key distinction. A snapshot date is when we pull the report, and the calendar date is a date in the future. So an example, our latest data point is for April 15. That's a snapshot date. So as of April 15, how many nights were booked for June 1st? And that was 500. Okay, so that's the calendar date. But the snapshot date is when we pull it. And again, calendar date is looking forward. And then quickly, the objectives, I might be repeating myself here, but what we're trying to do here with the forward booking index is to gauge a shift in traveler sentiment so that we can understand or try to identify when we can expect a recovery in the travel industry. Again, this is not necessarily a crystal ball. We're not going to tell you what's going to happen, but it's purely an indicator, so that when we can understand when are people comfortable with booking again, when do they say, okay, I'm going to, I'm going to book, and we're using short-term rentals as a property of travel industry recovery. When are people comfortable with booking again? When are people comfortable with booking somebody's home again and comfortable with the cleanliness, so to speak? So use that as your perspective as we're going through this, please. Okay, so let's take a quick look here at Austin. So April 15 is our snapshot date. So we pulled this data April 15, and we're looking for 100 days in the future forward, okay? And so this is for Austin. And let's take a look. If you see these blue columns, but those are the nights booked for every day going forward as of April 17th. So this is retroactive. So So if we pulled, when we pulled our data for April 17th, looking forward, this is what a healthy short-term rental market looks like for Austin. Again, you see your typical weekend, weekday trough progression, and this is normal. Most of the bookings are going to happen within your first month, month and a half, and then you have your typical. It typically tapers off, when people are less certain of when they want to, when they're going to book their vacation. So this is we're going to be using our baseline. Okay, this is what we strive, so to speak, want to strive for. This is what we're looking at right now. Okay, so this is as of April 15th, 2020. These are our forward nights booked. Again, so the gap here is the nights booked ratio. This is what we're trying to tighten up. And when we start seeing recovery, when we see indicators of recovery, this is going to start creeping up and start matching what we call our baseline. Okay. Now, I've done the same graph, and you can see that here down at the bottom right. But what we've also done, we've retroactively looked at the 3 months prior, just so you get a visual of kind of the differences month over month. Now, we typically look at it from a week over week standpoint, so we can be a bit more agile, more up to date. But I've done it by month, so you can really, to hammer the point home of the differences of what has transpired over these 4 months. Okay, so let's start with January 15th. Okay. Again, this is retroactive forward looking. So as of January 15th, these were the nights booked going forward 30 days. And as you can see, 2020 looked to be a good year for Austin at that time, obviously. The nights booked matched of this year matched that of 2019, and in some cases outperformed it slightly. So this would be a good sign. If I received this report and it said, okay, 2020 is going to look good, certainly January is going to look good. Okay. Now, again, the coronavirus is certainly going off in China. It's starting to kind of take hold in Europe at a later time, but really in the US, we're not necessarily worried about it. We're going to keep our bookings, at least for this 30-day time frame. Our plans haven't changed yet. Okay. Now let's look at 30 days forward. Let's look at February. The beginning from February 15th is looking pretty good. Again, the nights booked for 2020 is outperforming that of 2019, which is a good sign. We always want to see growth. So nothing has changed for the first 2 weeks. But after those 2 weeks, you see then a dip in demand for nights booked 2020. And this is where we're starting to see some concern, or maybe some unknowns from the travelers. They're not going to know what's going to come at this point. Look, in February, it hasn't hit fever pitch yet in the US, right? So we're kind of still dealing with it. We're seeing what the news stories are, right? So maybe what this is telling me that people there's a level of uncertainty here of being able to book that far out. And this is also going to tell us that there were some cancellations that have been made. Okay, but still, the first half of this 30-day period, fine. The latter half, uncertainty is starting to unfold. That turns us off to March. As I mentioned, March is really where it all happens. Okay, and you see the drastic drop in demand when we're comparing to what, again, a healthy forward 30-day index looks like. We're no longer seeing those typical peaks and troughs, those weekend troughs. It's really just down. Okay, so this is the starkest difference that we have month over month, is from February to March. March is, again, where it all kind of kicks off. We get our first, we get a declaration of national emergency. We get our first state to employ the lockdown measures, and then the rest of the states follow suit. And then in April, where we're currently sat, is just a continuation of what we're seeing from March 15th, from March and then to April, just lower numbers. That's kind of what we're seeing here. Again, we're not following the same the trend lines. It's just flat down. And right here, nobody's booking. It's done. Okay. As of right now, we'll see that in a bit, but we haven't seen a bottom as of yet. We should have updated figures by the end of this week. Again, we are updating this constantly, and we'll provide any updates if they do come. But we have not seen a bottom yet to this decline in demand. All right. And so what we look at all the rooms is our nights booked ratio. This is different than a year-over-year change that is typical in our reporting. So instead of getting a percentage change here, what we're looking at is the ratio of nights booked of this year to nights booked of last year. Because again, what we're trying to do is get back up to normal levels, right? So let's look at January, for example. As I mentioned, in January, that snapshot date, we were looking pretty good. Austin was outperforming the future demand of the year prior. So we're seeing a nights booked ratio here of basically 105%, right? If we were equal to the previous year, we'd be at 100%. Now 100%, that's healthy. That's where we want to be, right? Obviously, you want to be a little bit more. You always want to be growing, right? So in January, things were looking up for Austin. We had a 105% nights booked ratio. Fast forward April 15th, our nights booked ratio is at 19.3%. That's very bad, to say the least, right? So basically, we're at like 19.3, essentially like demand capacity, okay? So we have a lot of room we have a big gap to tighten up for us to get back to where we once were. And there's a chance that we don't get up to that 100% nights booked ratio this year. But at least if we can get to like a 60, if we can get back to a 60 to 80% nights booked ratio, then we'd be in a better position, okay? As I mentioned, we're looking at, these are month aggregations. Typically, we look at a week to week because we want to be a bit more granular. But again, this was purely so you can visualize the differences that we are seeing. And again, so here's your nights booked ratio. Again, good. You don't want to be under 100%, but this is kind of now our target. And you see this massive drop from February to March. We're having again, almost a 50% point drop from February to March, less so from March to April. But this is, hopefully we'd like to think that this is the bottom. But anyways, this is what we should be looking at, is the nights booked ratio and the change of that ratio over time. And we really should be looking at week to week, which we'll do in the next slide. Okay, so this is what we're doing with our index. We're looking at a week to week change, okay? Again, we're looking at nights booked here, and we're looking at the nights booked ratio. Let's focus on the 30-day index, just for consistency purposes. Here you'll see the nights booked for 2019, fairly stable in Austin, maybe a little bit of a drop. Maybe that has to do with kind of like possibly a hangover after South by Southwest, but fairly consistent. If you're comparing that now to 2020, again, so this is our ratio. This is about a 35%. We're at 35%. 100% would bring us here. And you see that the nights booked ratio dip as we go. And again, so we still haven't found a bottom yet. Hopefully, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to flatten this out. People talk about flattening the curve. We're trying to flatten the curve on the other way. That's what we're looking for, right? So again, we're looking at the nights booked ratio here, and then the change week over week. Okay, and so that's still growing down. This gives us kind of an exponential decline. So we're looking to flatten this out, and then hopefully what we're looking to do is to flatten out the nights booked, right? So again, this is our current week. This is April 15th, our last. So this is how many nights we have booked for the next 30 days, and this is where we should be. Again, this is our baseline. And you see for the past 5 weeks that has gone down. Kind of stayed somewhat consistent here, but then has gone down. Again, we're gonna look for this number to hopefully flatten out, stay the same. Same with this number. This will come first, and then once this, we're gonna look for this to stay at a negative 6.5%, and then we'll look for it to go to 0%. And then this is just a graph of our ratio change over time, as I mentioned. Okay, right. So this is the first thing we're going to be looking at. What we want to do is have that flattened out first. So again, let's look at the 30-day index for consistency. As you see, has gone down. April 8th, we're at a -6%, then went down another -0.5%. Hopefully that's a sign for us to kind of extend or maybe increase that ratio change. Again, what we're looking for is we want to get to a 0% ratio change point. That means that we've hit a bottom with respects to our nights booked. And then again, that's going to be the first sign. And then hopefully we can start seeing this kind of increase and then get as close as possible to, again, a quote unquote healthy level. So for that would be, again, here would be 65,000 nights booked, again, within the 30-day aggregation point. Okay, just a couple key takeaways from that, and then I think we can wrap up with maybe a couple questions, and it looks like we are somewhat on time here. Again, March is when everything changed. You see that from the data, that looking back of stays that already happened, but also in our retroactive forward booking index, that change from February to March is really when everything kicked off, right? We haven't really hit a bottom to the demand drop yet. We do expect to be around that. We'll see when you know, what happens when the data comes out later this week and the following week. If we can hit it, that's the first thing we're going to be looking for. Have we hit that demand drop? Okay. Again, just to reiterate, the metrics that we're looking at is flattening that change rate of nights booked, right? So that we're not declining exponentially anymore. And then after that, we want that nights booked change rate at 0%, so that we're staying flat with you know, how many nights booked we're looking at a 30 or 14 or 7-day index. That's what we're looking for. And then after that, it's then growth of nights booked. So we're tightening that gap of the nights booked ratio. Again, the ideal ratio is 100%. We don't expect to get that in the short term. Again, something we'll keep track of, and we'll keep you guys updated on. And then, you know, we want to focus on absolute demand figures like nights booked relative, rather than the relative demand figures of occupancy rates, as there's many factors at play that are affecting supply. Okay. Last thing I want to mention is that I think Joe did mention on the intro a bit that we are working on or our data team has currently an internal alert system or alert function that notifies us of any area, any region in the US, actually, you know, global, in which we're seeing an uptick in nights booked. Okay, so we're keeping that internal for now, and when we see that, we're going to dig deeper into it, and then we can update kind of, you know, our audience on what we're seeing. The idea being that this internal alert system then it becomes integrated in our upcoming dashboard, our interactive dashboard that is set to release in a couple weeks. Any current subscriber will receive, as part of their subscription, access to that database. It's essentially an extension of their vacation rental market intelligence report. But when that internal alert feature is ready, we're going to have that on our dashboard. And again, that gets updated weekly, if not daily. So it's something to look out for our current subscribers. And I don't know if anybody has questions at this time. If not, again, feel free to send through an email. You know, we're going to have a series. We're going to have more of these webinars as the data comes out. And we're going to update you guys on what we're seeing. And again, if we do have any alerts firing off, what we're going to do is we're going to have another webinar again and update you on what we're seeing. But again, myself and Joe and my team are at your disposal. Feel free to send us an email or give us a call. We're more than happy to jump on a supplementary call and go over some of the issues that I've mentioned. It looks like there are no questions at this time. Guys, again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll let you know if there are any updates in your particular area. And for future webinars, if you want us to feature your market, we can maybe take that into account and try to implement that area as well. I did get one question, do I have this data for Las Vegas? That is correct. We have this data for any area. We have global data. So we have it for any city in the United States. We can get it down to a zip code level or the macro level of just, what's happening domestically. Oh, and I got another question from somebody offline, that are we seeing any markets that are outperforming kind of what we're seeing domestically? Not so much. There are some areas. There are areas surrounding the kind of the metropolitan areas. So let's say the New York metro area, where the virus is, where they're taking a pretty big hit, and people are trying to leave the city, and either they're going into their secondary homes, their vacation homes, or they're booking a short-term rental. So we're talking about like your Long Islands or your Jerseys or your upstate New York, for the New York area. And so we're seeing them kind of outperforming the kind of the domestic averages. All right, guys, if there's nothing else, we appreciate your time. Again, stay tuned for updates, anything we're seeing. And again, feel free, we are at your disposal for any questions or further insights, and we hope you have a good afternoon. Bye.